The subject of this program is sexuality. It contains explicit images and content meant for a mature audience. Viewer discretion is advised. 19th century Egypt, near the Valley of the Kings, an extraordinary discovery is made. Contained within a fragile pot are some of the most graphic images from the ancient world. It would become known as the Turin Erotic Papyrus and would be one of the most controversial artifacts ever found from the ancient world.
It's full-on pornography, really.
Even by today's standards, the images on the 3,000-year-old papyrus are explicit.
If you sit and look at it, I think you have to be looking at one of the most shocking sets of images from the whole of antiquity.
How does this one discovery change our perception of ancient Egypt?
The Egyptians we tend to think of being much more buttoned up and repressed, but actually that's completely wrong.
What intimate messages are hidden among all the symbols, codes, and clues?
Egypt is the untold story of the ancient world. If we can decode the sexual mores, the customs, the morals, the laws of ancient Egypt, we can understand for the first time what was really happening between the sheets in ancient Egypt.
Turin, Italy. Among the collection of artifacts in the Egyptian Museum, the largest in the world outside Cairo, one item stands out. Papyrus 55001, more commonly known as the Turin Erotic Papyrus.
It's a very explicit sexual document from ancient Egypt. It's a very rare example because there aren't all that many of that kind.
Depicted within its fragments are images of 12 ordinary men and women in explicit sexual positions. For centuries, it was kept out of public view.
It was locked away in libraries and you had to go and register to look at it and have a very good reason for looking at it, and then it was only men. So in the Victorian times when it was published, women would have no good reason to go and look at something as filthy as the Turin Papyrus.
The controversy that has always followed the Turin Erotic Papyrus has created a mystery. Even today, we don't know its true meaning. Does it portray the sex lives of the gods and provide a coded message to the afterlife? Is it part of an elaborate and mystical ritual of conception? Or is it simply a relic of everyday erotica, an ancient pornographic magazine? Now, for the first time on television, we will decode this ancient puzzle. By deciphering its images and symbols, we will discover its true meaning and gain a more intimate view of the sexual lives of ancient Egyptians.
By looking at the data we have for ancient Egyptian sexuality, we get a sense of the people as they actually were, with the same issues, the same emotions, the same desires as us. And I think that view of them is much more interesting than just seeing them as strange, exotic figures dominated by mummies, myths, magic, and pyramids.
For centuries, the sex lives of ancient Egypt were overshadowed by other civilizations.
The Greeks and the Romans have the reputation for being very lustful societies, and that's partly because of the evidence that they've left behind. We see orgiastic scenes on their dinner services or bestial action on tombstones.
The full view of ancient Egypt was obscured.
The ancient Egyptians were a very sensuous, sensual society. For an ancient Egyptian, it was very, very important that you were an actively sexual creature.
It was a cover-up, aided by historians themselves. Sexual artifacts recovered from ancient Egypt were often subject to censorship.
We've lost some of the sexuality from the ancient world. In Italy, for example, the popes decreed that all genitalia should be covered up with fig leaves. And in the Victorian period as well in the UK, this was not something which people wanted to see.
One such example is the mutilated statue of Min, the Egyptian god of fertility, kept at the British Museum. Significantly, the statue is missing one important item.
During the Victorian era, the penis would be removed in order to save the blushes of people visiting the museum. There's also another example of Amun Min, but on a wall inscription.
In this case, Min's penis could not be removed. He had to be censored in a much more amusing way.
in the Petrie Museum. The penis was covered up with the museum number, nicely put over it, again so that no one would actually see such a disgraceful thing in the public eye.
Even today, some sexual images are kept hidden from the public. Close to where the Turin erotic papyrus was discovered on the west bank of Thebes, there is an archaeological site, 3,000 years old, kept secret from thousands of visitors nearby. It contains one of the earliest slanderous pornographic images in history, and it remains concealed in a cave. Not simply due to the nature of the image itself, but because of whom the image is thought to depict: Hatshepsut, one of ancient Egypt's few female rulers.
It's possible that it's the oldest piece of sexual graffiti in the world. It's certainly not the oldest image of people having sex, but possibly the oldest piece of graffiti showing this kind of act.
The drawing is located on the site of a temple in honor of the queen. Creating such a sexually explicit image would have been dangerous for the artist.
An image of the queen in a sexual position was a serious no-no, for sure, and would have been something that had to be hidden away, something that the person would probably get in serious trouble for if they were found out.
Due to the controversial nature of this graffito, few academics have accessed the cave. For this program, we have been given permission to investigate this unique archaeological site.
They block up the site to keep visitors out, and nobody gets to go in, usually. So now I'm getting to go in, and I'm very excited. So we're gonna take the door down, and we're gonna go in. Okay, shukran. Wow. Oh, wow, this is something.
It is not known who cut the limestone cave, but it is thought to be one of the craftsmen from the Valley of the Kings, who may have decided that it would be a good location for his own tomb. For a number of years, Liz has wanted to access this remote site.
Wow, this is fantastic. Oh, yeah. I've only seen it in books, and it's really good to see it in real life. This graffito was probably created by one of the workers from around this area, so probably a tomb worker or even a temple worker.
The graffiti shows what appears to be Hatshepsut being taken from behind by who they think could be Senenmut, her steward and possible lover.
Details of the drawing provide clues to its significance.
You have the male behind a female, and it's believed that it might be Senenmut and Hatshepsut because we have here the headdress. They think it's maybe the Nemes headdress, which would have been a sign of royalty, and since it's obviously a female figure, they thought, well, this was probably Hatshepsut.
Why would someone take the enormous risk of portraying a royal figure in such explicit terms?
This was the artist's way of showing his distaste at the fact that they did have a female king. It went against the laws of Ma'at, it went against everything that Egypt stood for.
The graffito offers a new view of the Turin erotic papyrus. When matched against the Turin images, it shows similarities to one of the 12 sexual intercourse positions depicted. Could it also have been a slanderous message? The graffito does provide an uncensored glimpse of everyday life in ancient Egypt.
It seems like it's a unique window into the world of the tomb workers that lived in this area and their concepts of sex in a completely different way than they were allowed to show in the temples and tombs, because they spent most of their time really showing things that only were part of this idea of decorum. And in here, they could express themselves in a completely different way.
But Egyptologists still face an incomplete picture of sexual life in ancient Egypt. To get the full intimate details, we must piece together the true meaning of the Turin erotic papyrus. Could they be messages to the kings and queens of ancient Egypt, or perhaps to an even higher power? To find out, we must explore the tombs and temples of the gods. There, the walls are filled with hidden codes, and if you know where to look, the sexual messages are everywhere. We are decoding an ancient sexual artifact known as the Turin Erotic Papyrus. Could it be a message to Egyptian royalty, like this piece of graffito found near the Valley of the Kings? Or could it be a message to a higher power, a message to the gods? To find out, we must enter the sacred temples, the gateway to the afterlife. Here, the images contain a code, symbols filled with sexual messages.
In religious iconography on temple walls, you see a lot of gods with huge erections, you see deities having sex, but Egyptian temples are very much enclosed spaces, which very few people would have access to.
Journeying along the River Nile, a team of experts will enter the sacred heart of Egypt's most important temples. By analyzing their artwork, they can unlock their hidden meaning.
In contrast to the showy, pornographic world of ancient Rome, Egyptian sex is much more coded, much more symbolically displayed.
Central to the tombs was the idea that when you died, your body would need to go to the afterlife. The tombs were portals, and sex would be an important part of that transition.
When you die, the idea is it's not the end of life, it's the beginning of a new life. And the beginning of new life starts with birth. So you do have the sexuality and fertility aspects associated with everything to do with death and the funerary rituals.
Dr. Lisa Manickay is one of the leading experts in the sexual history of ancient Egypt. She has been studying Egyptian tomb art for the last 45 years.
On the walls of some of the tomb chapels, we have a number of scenes that look like scenes out of daily life, the ideal daily life scenes, parties, banquets, etc. But they all have a funerary purpose because they are on the walls of a tomb chapel.
The ancient Egyptians believed these images were instrumental in the act of being reborn.
This is sex in disguise, you may call it like that. It is a picture of the ideal occasion in real life. In order to be reborn, you have to have these sexual activities that goes before any birth or rebirth.
Symbols that we see on the temple walls are also present on the Turin Erotic Papyrus.
The key word here is the lotus flower. The lotus flower is a symbol of resurrection. Probably had narcotic properties, so it's not without reason that they're sniffing these lotus flowers, but they're just everywhere.
There are also other similarities between the codes here and our mysterious papyrus, symbols that also ring true today.
Sex is greatly facilitated, I think, the initial steps by means of alcohol, and the Egyptian knew that. And we always have this triangle of sexuality, of music, and of drunkenness. It really goes together. It did then as it does today.
The messages reveal that sex was central to rebirth in the afterlife, but their interpretation can be complex.
Sexuality was of paramount importance, and it is displayed not directly, but through symbols.
Leaving the temples of Luxor behind, Lisa is traveling to the Egyptian capital, Cairo, to study one of the most important finds from the ancient world, the treasures of Tutankhamun. Hidden on a 3,500-year-old clothes chest, Lisa believes she has found a significant clue to how the ancient Egyptians depicted sex in a covert manner.
This is a clothes chest that was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. On it we see a picture of the king sitting on a chair, shooting bow and arrow. At his feet we have his wife, Queen Ankhesenamun, who's holding an arrow ready for him to shoot. The mere fact that he's actually shown in that position, shooting with bow and arrow, takes us to the real significance of this scene, the symbolic, encoded message.
The key to this clue is its double meaning.
The word seti in Egyptian means shooting, but it also means to ejaculate, which has a very sexual significance because they wanted to be reborn in the hereafter, in the afterlife. And in order to be reborn, they had to have some sexual activity beforehand. And this is what is explained here in a coded message. And this is a way of visualizing this very vital sexual energy which they needed to be reborn.
Hunting was a common metaphor for sexual prowess in the ancient world. Similar codes have been found on the tomb wall of an accountant named Nebamun.
It shows Nebamun accompanied by his wife, his young daughter, and he's out in the marshes hunting birds and catching fish. And it is also, of course, an intensely erotic scene to the original audience's eyes.
Traveling through the marshes is known to be an ancient Egyptian euphemism for having sex.
All of these overtones of fertility, productivity, sensuality, all combine in this image to suggest how Nebamun will be reborn in the eternal life, how he'll continue very much as a sexual, sensual being.
Could the Turin erotic papyrus have been a link to the afterlife? Could it have been a coded message to the gods?
It does show the 12 positions of intercourse. Whether they relate to this world or the next or to the world of the gods, that is very much debated at the moment.
To find out, we must first explore the sex lives of the ancient Egyptian gods themselves.
Only certain people would be able to come into this part of the temple, probably priests, not ordinary people who would be kept outside the temple precinct. So these images would be hidden and wouldn't be a part of what the everyday people would be seeing.
3 hours south of Luxor is the Temple of Abydos. Hieroglyph symbols provide clues that sex was important to the ancient Egyptian gods.
The ancient Egyptians had two ways of writing their language, one of which was in hieroglyphics, or sacred carved writings. There's a lot of symbolic imagery behind both the illustrations themselves and the writing system, because each individual hieroglyph is in fact a picture of something. There are a lot of different meanings. Things can be read in a variety of different ways. In this section right here, you can see this one particular sign, which is a phallus. The phallus is part of the Egyptian repertoire of hieroglyphic signs, and it can have one of many meanings, but it is indeed a very sexual symbol.
The phallus hieroglyph signifies masculinity, aggression, fertility, and sexual power, revealing a sexual side to the gods. Sex was deeply ingrained into religious beliefs.
The whole of Egyptian society is certainly based around sex in the sense that they understood its importance and its significance, and that without the sexual act, their society wouldn't continue.
Sex was also central to ancient Egyptian creation myths. Contained within the British Museum is an ancient papyrus which shows how the Egyptians believed their gods performed sexual acts to create the world. It's a rare piece of evidence which reveals that sex formed a magical and mystical aspect to religious beliefs in ancient Egypt.
In one way, the Egyptians are very different from us. They are very discreet about human sexual activity. But when it comes to the gods, the iconography to us seems just to be simply pornographic.
To represent how self-sustaining and fertile the earth is, the ancient Egyptians show the autofellatio of the earth god Geb.
It's not something we would consider putting in a religious context, still less burying as a religious document with a priestess of the main god of the time.
The men in the Turin erotic papyrus are all exceptionally endowed, like the god Geb. Rather than mere mortals, could these men and their sexual acts be a depiction of gods in the afterlife? To investigate further, we must go into the temples of Abydos. Deep within its chambers is a phallic symbol linked to the story of Isis and Osiris, a mythical tale of life and rebirth.
We're going into the chapel of Ta Sokar, and there's a few really interesting reliefs that are located here that show the god Osiris. Here we have an image of the mummiform Osiris shown on a bed with the goddess Isis as a bird located on top of his erect phallus. This scene is a lot more coded than you would see in a tomb or maybe even graffiti or whatnot, because it shows the gods. And so you don't have the image of Isis as a woman, you have an image of Isis shown as a kite or a bird of prey. This was probably not a shocking image to the Egyptians, though. It's something that showed the power of Osiris through his phallus, and it was very important to show these two on a different level than, say, the rest of the divinities or even the rest of the population at large.
Even today, this sexual artifact still holds a certain power for some visitors. The site attracts women to the temples who are in search of the magic of the gods to help them.
The phallus has been either chipped out, it's been touched, guardians come in, people come in and want to touch it and kind of be part of this power. Even today, people go into temples and want to be part of this fertility that could even make them pregnant in modern day times.
So the coded symbols and graphic depictions were not just a way to be reborn into the afterlife. They were linked to fertility in everyday life and the act of sex itself. For some, this would all be revealed, all take place in a dark, intimate room called the Bes Chamber. The Turin Erotic Papyrus offers a shocking but cryptic image of sex in ancient Egypt. To understand its meaning, we are decoding other sexual images from the era. They reveal that sexuality was connected with the gods and helped the transition into the afterlife. But how did this affect ordinary Egyptians in their everyday lives?
For the ancient Egyptians, sexuality was very much just a part of daily life. From the few settlement sites that we have, we can see that they lived in fairly small houses and would have lived on top of each other, quite literally. So the sexual act would have been fairly visible to all the family.
Sex, conception, and fertility were closely linked with the gods, with one god in particular.
Bes is the god of fertility. He is the protector of pregnant women. He's the protector of young children.
How did ordinary Egyptians trying to conceive interact with the god Bes? A fascinating new site may provide intriguing answers. It is situated 22 miles south of Cairo in Saqqara, which is also known as the City of the Dead.
At Saqqara, there are the so-called Bes chambers, 4 little rooms decorated with figures of Bes and naked women on the walls.
Mystery still surrounds this incubation, or Bes chamber.
These chambers seem to have been used by people who were having trouble conceiving. Perhaps they came there to sleep the night in the chamber and to go away expectantly hoping to conceive. Perhaps they came to receive advice from the priests of the god himself.
Bes is